welcome back to Law&Crime, everybody. As we discussed earlier, infamous financier Jeffrey Epstein was arrested over the weekend. Epstein made headlines over a decade ago for being offered and accepting what many claim was a controversial sweetheart plea deal, allowing him to escape serious prison time in Florida for allegedly abusing underage girls. Well, fast forward 11 years, and Epstein was taken into custody on Saturday here in New York on sex trafficking charges. And right now, the indictment has been released. So let's break it all down. Our very own Rachel Stockman is joining us. Rachel, what a development. You've had a chance to look at this indictment. What happened?
All right, just a few minutes ago, the indictment was unsealed. 14 pages long. I'm holding it here in my hand. Conspiracy for sex trafficking charges and sex trafficking charges. It's a 2-count indictment, and we have actually a bit about it from the actual indictment itself. Let's pull up this full screen. Beginning in at least 2002, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, enticed and recruited and caused to be enticed and recruited dozens of minor girls to engage in sex acts with him, after which Epstein paid the victims hundreds of dollars in cash at his New York residence and the Palm Beach residence. Now, if you read through this indictment, which I'm still going through, it paints a picture that Jeffrey Epstein was really the mastermind behind this whole sex trafficking scheme. He'd recruit these women, bring them to his mansion, both here in New York City and in Palm Beach. He would bring them in for a, quote, massage. Then things would go, obviously, into what the feds are saying, a criminal act. This is all between 2002 and 2005. The feds are alleging this happened. It's not clear if it then occurred afterwards. We're still working through the indictment. Jeffrey Epstein expected to appear in court today. We're keeping an eye on that. If we get any new developments, we'll let you know, Jesse.
Now, Rachel, let me ask you this. Do we have any information about the victims? I read that there might have been one as young as 14 years old.
Yes, in fact, according to the indictment, many of the victims were younger than 14 years old that he recruited as part of this larger sex trafficking scheme. So not only are we dealing with underage victims, according to the indictment, it looks like you have some employees that work for Jeffrey Epstein that may have turned on him to give them information to the feds about what was going on here.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that it's fast forward 11 years and now we're seeing this happen again. I have to ask you, so far, with anything that you've read, have there been any other names thrown out there? Any other parties implicated in this sex ring?
Well, that is the big question. Again, I just quickly skimmed before coming on air the 14 pages. No other names that I saw.
Yep, okay. I think we lost Rachel there, so we're going to maybe have an opportunity to bring her back on in a second. Janine, what a development this is. Now, sex trafficking conspiracy and sex trafficking, these 2 counts, I'm expecting some serious prison time here for these, for potentially if he's ultimately convicted of this.
Absolutely, and there's dozens of victims, as she was saying to us.
Now, how do these cases play out usually? It's complicated. I mean, it spans a significant period of time, 3 years, and also you have multiple victims. So how do these cases usually play out?
Well, this is the thing. The prosecution has their work cut out for them, but they didn't bring these charges not having everything ready to go. So I think that we're going to see a very clean case put on.
And you think there's going to be some corroborating witnesses down the road?
It reminds me of the Heidi Fleiss case, remember?
So remind us exactly what happened there and how this might relate.
Well, Heidi Fleiss was the madam with all the different celebrity clients, and all of a sudden everybody's name was coming out. You know, people are going to cut themselves deals if they're implicated in this, if the investigation leads to them.
So you think there's a lot of people who back in 2000, you know, back when this first broke 11 years ago and said, hey, I don't have to worry about anything. He took that plea deal. It's all being shut. Then the Miami, I think it was the Miami Herald that basically reintroduced this story about what was happening. And now there's people who are very nervous today, come Monday morning after the July 4th weekend.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, look at R. Kelly all these years later. So, you know, it didn't go away. I mean, it's 11 years, but it didn't go away.
Is there statute of limitations on this?
Well, in New York, they've opened up the statute of limitations for underage abuse. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm not exactly sure. We haven't read the indictment how they've framed it.
But as Rachel said, these are such young victims. And now they're young women who can come forward and speak about exactly what they went through if they choose to.
Totally. And last time around, they were kind of vilified by saying they were prostitutes. You're not a 14-year-old prostitute when some, billionaire puts you in this position and you don't know any better, and then all of a sudden gives you some money afterwards.
What's his defense team going to do now? The indictment was just released. We believe he's going to appear in court. What are the next steps for Epstein?
Well, again, it's going to depend on how the indictment was written, because remember, there was an anti-prosecution clause in his original deal, and how do they get around that?
What do you mean by that, an anti-prosecution clause?
Meaning there was an agreement not to prosecute him for basically what they're prosecuting him for. So are there new victims? We don't know. Like, as soon as we read through it, we'll have a better idea how they got here.
Well, just one correction I want to say earlier. The youngest victim was 14 years old. I mean, we thought it might have been earlier, younger than that, but it was 14. She was 14 years old. Still disturbing nonetheless. And, we are going to bring you more updates on this story as it keeps breaking. And I think we first broke it and first talked about it when it first came to light a few months ago. So we'll follow it. We'll let you know what happens next. In the meantime, let's go back live. We're live in Scott Nelson. The defense expert witness is on the stand. So let's go back. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. As we discussed earlier, infamous financier Jeffrey Epstein was arrested over the weekend. Epstein made headlines over a decade ago for being offered and accepting what many claim was a controversial sweetheart plea deal that allowed him to escape serious prison time in Florida for allegedly abusing underage girls. Well, fast forward 11 years, and Epstein was just taken into custody on Saturday in New York on new sex trafficking charges. And now, today, the indictment has officially been released, and as we can report, he was charged with sex trafficking and also sex trafficking conspiracy. We believe that a press conference will be held today where we'll learn new information about this indictment and what's in store for Mr. Epstein. We can talk to you about the fact that one of the victims was reported to be 14 years old. Really, really disturbing information. So as soon as we have more info on that press conference, we'll make sure to let you know. Everybody, so you just heard this press conference. It was a joint press conference with the SDNY and also the FBI. Manhattan U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman was conducting most of it, described what was in the indictment, what led to this indictment, and what they're going to be doing moving forward, including that they're going to be seeking detention of Epstein. They don't want him out on bail because out on bond, because they feel he's a flight risk. So let's break it all down. First thing I want to ask, Janine, They said they want any other victims to come forward. That's interesting because in one sense, wouldn't they already have known about everybody? If they're going to bring an indictment like this, shouldn't they have had as everybody that they can conceivably think of?
Well, I agree with you, they should, but it's interesting, and I would be very, very nervous if I were Epstein or his attorneys, because they've opened it up right now to anybody who has any information or was a victim themselves to come forward. It's already, the case is already there. You can just add on to it.
Yeah, and they think he's a flight risk. They said, look, these charges carry with it 45 years in prison. For a man of his age, that's basically a life sentence. Likelihood that he will be spending his time in jail pending trial.
Well, they could find other means than putting him in jail. They could give him an ankle bracelet. They could do different things. So I don't know that they're actually going to detain him in the jail.
But he is a flight risk, isn't he?
Well, he's like another Roman Polanski. They're just going to take off to a place where they can't be extradited.
And the idea here, these recruitment efforts, that's the disturbing part. Not only soliciting these young women to engage in sex acts, but then having them recruiting their friends or women that they know. That's the part that just goes above and beyond. It's
the sickest part. It's the most twisted part, because you take the ones that are being victimized and you have them then victimize their friends.
Now, he didn't really get into evidence, but it seems to suggest they have strong evidence against Epstein. What kind of evidence would they have from this period of time in the early 2000s? This was before cell phones. The idea here of, I think, is there more activity happening at this press conference? Okay, so let's go back. There's more activity right now. Okay, that was actually from the beginning of the press conference that we might have missed because we cut in midway. So, Janine, I just want to ask you another question about this. The evidence presented, he didn't really get into it, but is this just witness statements? Again, we're talking about something from the early 2000s before we even had cell phones. What is the evidence against Epstein, you think?
It's going to be witness statements, but the other thing is they executed a search warrant at the time that they just arrested him, and they found evidence in his mansion of photographs, again, of young women who seemed to be underage.
Yeah, and again, one of the questions that kept coming up is, what spawned this? How, it's such a long period. Is it the journalism? Is it the aspect of investigative journalism that ultimately launched this back out with the Miami Herald article?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was the trigger. It brought it to light.
And that happens more times than not, that if it's a combination between journalism and the law.
Yeah, we saw it happen with the Catholic Church. We saw, we've seen it happen many times in the past.
Right, and this collaboration between the FBI and the SDNY, how does that work exactly? I mean, you see it here. How does it work in terms of this investigation and where we are today?
So it's going to be a collaborative investigation. Remember, the actions took place both in Florida and in New York. The feds are probably leading, obviously, but they work together collaboratively.
Now let me ask you this.
Okay.
Early in the morning, we heard all about this happening over the weekend. Who are we going to hear from next today? Are we going to hear from Alan Dershowitz? Are we going to hear from President Clinton? Are we going to hear from President Trump? Are we going to hear from different people who have somehow been implicated in the Jeffrey Epstein case? Because it's going to be a long day, and it just started.
Okay, well, I don't think we're going to hear from President Clinton. Trump might send out a tweet, but we're definitely going to hear from Dershowitz.
Okay, well, we'll wait and hear what everyone has to say. Let's take a break. When we come back, a lot more to cover here on the network. Stay tuned.